They were arguably the UK's biggest band of the 70s, and yet they barely made a dent in America. Slade has quite a surprising and tragic story. This one's a request from my viewer Keen Mustard, and the link is in the description if you want to request a video yourself. So then, Slade. You'd be forgiven if you don't remember the name, especially if you're American, but you'll definitely recognise their music. Back in the early 70s, Slade was everything. A working class group of lads from Wolverhampton who somehow turned glam rock into a national treasure. Noddy Holder, Jim Lee, Dave Hill and Don Powell. They weren't taking themselves seriously, but Britain was. As Dave Hill himself put it, most importantly, we had great songs. But the whole country recognised us as four working class guys who'd got glammed up, stuck their fists in the air, and were telling everyone to have a good time. Between 1971 and 1976, Slade racked up 17 consecutive UK top 20 hits, 6 of which reached number 1. They were all over the radio and in the British consciousness. But they weren't always the glam rockers you see here. They evolved from something very different. Way back in 1966, the first version of the Slade lineup operated under the name The In-Betweens and played a blend of R&B and pop. They actually released a few singles, but nothing really landed. Then came the short-lived phony skinhead phase. They changed their name to Ambrose Slade, which soon of course became just Slade, and hired Jimi Hendrix's former manager Chas Chandler. And this idea was actually the brainchild of their manager, Chandler, who noticed not many bands were doing the whole skinhead thing, so why not give it a go? Back then, skinhead was more of a fashion statement than the political ideologies they would later be linked with. But in the 70s, that was beginning to change. We got a lot of flack for being a skinhead band. Television and radio were very high-handed in those days. It wasn't an image we could sustain and get mass acceptance with. But the skinhead thing was a brief stylistic tweak. Next came the glam era. They grew their hair, got some platforms on, ditched proper spelling. They were definitely finding their sound and their voice. I said I get down, get with it! And then the floodgates just opened. From 1971 onwards, they were dominating the charts. As I mentioned, between 71 and 76, they had 17 consecutive top 20 hits, including 6 number ones. That is an insane achievement on its own. But Slade actually made history in 1973 as the first act to have 3 singles debut at number 1 on the UK charts in the same year. To be clear, many bands like the Beatles, for example, had achieved 3 UK number 1s in the same year, but Slade was the first act to have all 3 enter the chart at number 1. They were even named the most successful British band of the 70s, at least on sales of singles, which is incredible when you think of who was big at the time. Seriously, think about it. Queen, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Genesis, David Bowie, so on and so on. Slade outsold them all, if the claim is accurate. But how? Well, let's look at some of the songs. It's like hair metal before hair metal. You can clearly see the way the glam rock scene influenced all those 80s bands that came later, and they just kept pumping out tune after tune. Squeeze Me, Please Me. Goodbye to Jane. Goodbye to Jane. Goodbye to Jane. Has the maid to match up to her soon. And of course, Come On Feel the Noise. It was never-ending assault of noise, riffs, call and return choruses. It was a riot. Speaking of riots, by the way, Quiet Riot had 3 big hits in the 80s, 2 of which were Slade covers. That's how influential this band was. And to go with the seemingly never-ending hits, they were selling out massive shows as well, all over the UK. Their momentum seemed unstoppable, even if they hadn't quite cracked the US. Then, as always, as seems to be the way, life tragically slapped them down. Everything changed on July 4th, 1973. Drummer Don Powell was involved in a tragic car accident. It left him with a smashed skull and even claimed the life of his girlfriend, Angela. Powell was rushed to intensive care where the outlook was pretty grim. Suddenly, that wave of success had broken. Our tour had ended at Earl's Court, and there were 18,000 people in to see us. We had a stormer of a show, and we were really riding on the crest of a wave. Then a week later, Don had his crash. He was given 24 hours to live. It all came crumbling down in one day. The aftermath was brutal. Don had no working memory. He couldn't even remember how to play the drums. The accident left him with no sense of smell or taste either. Amazingly, Don survived and began fighting his way back to full health. His mates' loyalty came through. They refused to carry on without him and backed him all the way. They did temporarily get Jim Lee's brother to fill in on drums, but that was always a temporary stand-in. Within a couple of months, Don was getting his strength back, and finally, they asked the question, "Do you think you can play live again?" He was suffering from severe memory loss, but they decided to take him out on the road anyway. Without Don, there was just no Slade. Slade was always all about us four people who really gelled. Take away one of those people, and that's the end of it. Incredibly, they found that once Don started playing a song, he could then remember it. And so they came up with a simple, slightly crazy solution.
When I first realised that I got amnesia, I used to fight like crazy, and that was the worst thing I could do.
The memory thing was a problem with Don, but we just took it on board. It was just the way it was.
I didn't realise at the time, and we came to rehearse to do something. We'll do, let's try Come On Feel the Noise. How does it go?
And Don grabbed hold of me and said, Jim, what? How does it go?
Sing it to me, sing it to me.
So while I'm talking to the audience and chatting to the audience, Jim's sort of behind me saying to Don, it starts like this. And once he got the start, he was away. He knew it then.
And with that method, they overcame a life-changing accident by just singing the tune to their brain-damaged drummer on massive stages to thousands of people. It took 2 years for them to coax him back. I absolutely love that refusal to lie down. At this point, some of you, especially Keen Mustard, probably wondering when I'm going to bring up that Christmas song. Well, now. So here it is, Merry Christmas. That song was totally left field for them. And it came out of quite a strange place. At a strange time as well. Partly, it was born out of a need to regain some momentum that they'd lost. But it was also a hard time in the UK in general. Economically and politically, the country was under a dark cloud. The population needed a boost just as much as the band did. And then the magic moment happened. Jim Lee's mother-in-law challenged him to write a Christmas song. Initially he resisted, but then the band came around to the idea and set to it. Noddy had an old psychedelic ditty from way back in 1967, and Jim turned it into a glam-charged Christmas anthem. And the song just went supersonic. It was released in November 1973 and had sold 1 million copies by Christmas. It sold 500,000 in pre-sales alone.
When you always know when it's Christmas in England, you know, here it is, Merry Christmas.
If Ozzy rates it, you know you've made it. That song cemented their everyone knows that band status, but strangely, they were still nothing in America. Slade toured America as well in 1975, full stage show, gig after gig, opening for Aerosmith, ZZ Top, Black Sabbath, even Santana. In the UK, they were household names, but the US, for some reason, just weren't interested. But why? It really doesn't make sense. You can't say they were too bold or too brash because the likes of Aerosmith and Kiss were doing similar things in US arenas. And the live shows did go off brilliantly. but they just couldn't get it to translate into radio airtime or sales. One thing that might have impacted this was budget. They simply couldn't afford to spend a year or two in the US, both financially and logistically. They couldn't afford to neglect their UK and EU fans. That scene was their bread and butter, so they only did small stints at a time in the US. In the later 70s, Slade even experienced a bit of a dip back home. The songs just weren't hitting the same. Punk and disco was taking over, things were looking bleak. But then came Reading Festival, August 1980, a lifeline. Asked at the last minute to fill in for Ozzy Osbourne, they weren't expecting much, but they tore the roof off, even though it was an outside gig. The crowd screamed for Merry Xmas, everybody, in the middle of summer.
It's been a long time of year for Merry Christmas. Well, let's hear you lot sing it, let's hear you lot. So
Suddenly, nostalgia created a triumphant comeback, and they were back in the public eye and hitting the charts again. But then came a bit of a weird twist. Remember I mentioned Quiet Riot? Well, their cover of Come On Feel the Noise was a huge hit in the US. So suddenly, America gave Slade a second look. 1984's Keep Your Hands Off My Power Supply, which was renamed and rebranded for the US audience, cracked the US top 40, and Run Run Away became their first top 20 single in the US.
if you got a crush, don't be about the bush. When I've got a crush, run away.
Had they finally broken the States? Sadly, tragedy struck again. Jim Lee fell ill with hepatitis C, and everything stalled. By the mid-80s, the dreams of making it big in America faded. By the early 90s, the original lineup splintered for good. They might have faded away in the end, but they left a massive legacy. You can hear their music in everyone who even came close to glam or hair metal in the 80s. Kiss, Def Leppard, and of course Quiet Riot. Even very different acts like the Ramones and the Sex Pistols have credited their attitude and charisma as huge inspiration. And even Oasis. Speaking of which, actually, Noel Gallagher has a really strange way of writing songs. He writes by, well, not writing. I had to make a whole video about that because it was fascinating. Click over here to watch that next.